Chances are at some point in your life you've drawn something similar to this, a little stick man. If you don't know how to draw a stick man, well then just copy this on the screen right now, and now you're at the same starting base that we're gonna have for this video of how to draw a human. So first, we're gonna kind of take this stick man and break it down step by step by adding little elements to it that make it more and more proportional to a realistic human. And then after that, we'll go into some basic anatomy in order to create a more proportional, realistic looking human. So our next step right here, we're gonna add a little line, two little lines that separate the shoulders and the legs. So adding these little lines here kind of just space out the chest more, make it more realistic, adds a neck, and so this will be our first little step into enhancing your stick figure. Now this next step, we're going to be adding a few extra circles that represent different things on the human bodies. So this big central circle is representing the chest to the rib cage. We have a little line for the kind of abdomen, the stomach area, and then we put another circle for the waist at the bottom. And now two more lines that we carry on from the last one represent shoulders. But other than that, it's not too much different. So again, just step by step, slowly evolving this stick man into a more realistic human. So now for this next step, we put a little point at the bottom of the head to roughly sort of symbolize a chin. And then when we go through and add the rib cage again, we'll add the waist back. I like to put this little line on the rib cage to kind of signify the front edge of the rib cage, like where the parts of your ribs that kind of stick out. It's that. And now we're going to use a few more circles to signify joints on the arms and legs. So we have a ball or two balls on each side of the shoulder blades for the shoulder joints themselves, and then some elbow joints that come down, and then at the very end of the arms we'll have little triangles that'll represent hands. I like using triangles to represent basic hands. You could use circles if you want, but this is my kind of preference. Then we're putting two more joints where the hips would meet the legs, two joints for the knees, and then again using some triangles for the feet. Now this is pretty much the basic human shape that we're going to be working with. But it's missing some core proportional values. So these four steps, these four different figures, once you kind of figure out, just draw step 4 over a few times, get used to it and kind of remember how to draw. It's really a simple drawing, but then this is going to be the building block once we add our proportions to it to create a realistic looking human. This next step, we're going to use a pretty common technique where we use the measurements of heads to proportion out the characters correctly. So here I'm going to draw two lines. These are going to be two columns of circles that represent the size of a head. So if you break it up like the lines like I did, set them up into 8 subdivisions, and then so these two pillars are going to be on the left side, I'm going to have a front view of the human, and then the right side is going to be a side view. So we're just using these same proportions for their height. And add these little lines, breaking it up when you're initially drawing it, because I like to make sure it's even. So I'll first put lines through the middle and then break those up into fourths and then down to eighths. Now on a different layer, I'll be drawing out these same proportions pertaining to the last little figure we drew, figure number 4. So you're going to want to divide this up by putting the waist on the bottom, or right above the middle line. So that's where the waist goes. And then you're going to want to split the chest in between the two middle circles so that the center of the chest is going right through the middle of those two. And then the head is obviously going to occupy the size of the top one, and the neck goes in the middle. And then, knee joints are exactly halfway down. One thing that you'll kind of notice is that the legs are exactly as long as, or exactly as tall as the body and the head is. in total, which is usually something that I guess kind of would think that the legs might be a little shorter than that, but they actually are pretty long. The wrist joints go right below the waistline, and the hands kind of droop down closer to the knees. And once you get these proportions figured out, just kind of try to etch these rough estimates in your mind. Most importantly, that the legs are as long as the head and the torso combined. Make sure that that's really solid. Also, don't forget that there's a curve in the spine when you look at it from the side. It curves in towards the stomach and then out around the shoulders, and then kind of angles inward when your neck is going back up to your head. Now that we've got these basic proportions mapped out correctly, we're going to start laying the basic anatomy over this skeleton. So you're going to want to start by kind of outlining how the muscles would go around. Now, your only real knowledge of this is it doesn't need to go much deeper than the basic muscles, because once you get into deeper anatomy, that's a very kind of advanced topic. You want to wait until you learn how to do poses well, perspective, foreshortening, creating interesting shapes and dynamic poses. You're going to wait till after you've figured out all that before you get into the real nitty-gritty of anatomy. But for now, just the basic muscles are going to do. Just make sure you know where the biceps and triceps and shoulders, how they match up. And something that's really really helpful from time to time, especially when you're learning just basic anatomy, is just look at a reference of like a diagram of a human body, of human muscles. Just kind of copy the diagram over and over again from different angles, from the front, from the side, and the back, until you understand and just kind of memorize how these basic muscles are shaped. And remember that the rib cage pokes out. You always want to have some type of indication of the rib cage. The obliques come down to the side. There's usually a bit of a crease in the stomach right where the belly button is. I like to put a crease in there, at least. It's kind of like a stylist, not really a stylistic thing, but it just helps to define where a stomach is. And there's also like an hourglass shape that kind of surrounds it. And you really just want to play around with it until you kind of understand these shapes really well. Make sure each muscle is protruding and contracting in the areas that they should. Like, for example, the calves, they stick out just a bit more than where the legs are around the ankles. Same with the forearms, they'll stick out more. Adding little triangles, kind of angular shapes to indicate elbows and knees. Just simple stuff. And when I like to draw simple hands like this, I'll usually just have an indication of the index finger and a knuckle on that, and then the other four fingers, the other three fingers, three normal fingers, will be kind of clumped together as one, and then the thumb will be another just kind of blocky rectangle, to just keep it simple before you really know what you want to do with the hands. Also note that above the chest there are traps that kind of come down as these angular lines that connect the top of the neck to the shoulders, so it's not just a flat, the top of your body is not just kind of flat where your neck sticks straight out. There's angle that goes up to it. And here's just a basic side view for demonstration, and get used to kind of drawing from every angle. It's very important to make sure that you understand what these muscles look like from the side, from the front, from the kind of in between the front and the sides, and in between the sides and the back. You want to make sure how all these muscles kind of link up together. Now we're going to use these same skeletons to showcase the female anatomy. Now, one of the most important parts is that you want to narrow the shoulders. Men naturally have much broader, wider shoulders than women, so you're going to want to close them in closer to the chest to create a more convincing female structure. Also note that the waist comes in, it's much narrower to come out for naturally wider hips. And beyond that, it's generally better to stylistically show less muscle tone or less kind of bulging muscles, I guess. That's more of like a male stereotypical trait. So usually to convey a female drawing better through simple lines is just to create more straighter or more curvy kind of simple lines. One thing that's important in line drawing like this, it's also very important for something like cartooning, is that you want to omit certain lines, certain wrinkles, in order to maintain the image that you want to show. So, for example, if you say you're drawing a face and you draw all the lines on the face, like the laugh lines and the little gap in between the mouth and the nose that's kind of indented right in the center. If you draw little bags under their eyes and everything, they're gonna look old. They're gonna look kind of just like wrinklier, and if you're not necessarily going for that, then you're not gonna want that. And so it's the same thing with detail on a female shape versus a male shape. You're usually gonna want to tone it back, keep it a tiny bit more simple, and just play around with it until you can create something that's recognizably female. I also use a similar kind of technique for the feet that I'll use for the hands. I'll just draw the big toe, and then all the other toes will kind of be connected into one, so that it's an easier shape to convey when you're blocking out these kind of basic structural parts of drawing a human. And make sure you're still maintaining that arch in the spine when you go in to draw the anatomy over your skeleton. Uh, it looks much more natural from the side when you include that bump, or that little kind of, when you include it waving inward. Now, to finish this up, I'm going to be drawing the kind of backside anatomy for both female and male figures. Obviously, you want to keep in mind the wider hips when drawing a woman, the narrower waist, and then they have a bit more of a prominent line going down the middle of their back, and the two little tiny muscles that kind of go around that look like a kind of an oval shape around that central line. So understand that there's shoulder blades there. Just draw simple ovals for shoulder blades as well, and then the thinner arms coming down. They also have a pretty big variation in between the width of their legs, from the base of their leg down to their ankle. If you actually look at where each point is, it's a pretty big difference in thickness. And males have this too, but it's more prominent in women. Now when we're drawing the male form, broaden the shoulders back up. And there's a few, actually it's better to kind of define some of the more of the shoulder blade muscles a little bit more prominently, just because they'll be bulkier and more square. But aside from that, it's practically the same, just noting the different bumps and kind of flow of how the shapes of the legs and the arms go. They kind of go just in and out and in and out. You can see the traps kind of going up towards the neck more prominently from the backside. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So Hopefully this has helped. Now remember that there's no shame in using reference images as you're learning things like anatomy and proportion and everything, because you need to draw from reality before you can learn to draw it from imagination. You need to learn all the rules this way. So for practicing, and actually through most of art in general, it's very important to use references. You can build your visual library this way. But now one important thing to note moving forward is that these, if you're drawing people that look exactly like this, they're very rigid. This is just a very straightforward kind of diagram style. So a future video, I'll be going into poses, how to create some basic poses to just add some interest, because people in reality don't exist quite looking like this. Even when they're standing, they'll probably have some sort of different element of their stance that's different than just being straight on. So yeah, next we're gonna get into poses, and I hope you learned something. But yeah, that's it. Peace.